So for this lesson, students will be determining how food gets from the farm to their table. And so to do this, we're going to be making lunch from fruits and vegetables that are found here at the farm. And so we'll be making pizza and salad today. So to start the students off, have them start to brainstorm some ideas of what fruits and vegetables they may want to make a salad and to put on their pizza. And explain to them that in just a few minutes we're going to be going into the farm and we're going to be picking some vegetables and fruits from the garden that will be able to be used for the lunch that they're making. And so before we go into the garden, set some boundaries for the students of what should be picked, what shouldn't be picked, and where they should be walking to not damage the other crops that are growing here. And so once the students have brainstormed some ideas of what they would like to grab, you can lead them through the garden, have them pick some fruits and vegetables that they'll be able to prep later on to use for their lunch that they're making. And so once students have done that, have them start thinking about seasonality. So what fruits and vegetables grow during each season, and why might they think that it's important to eat those fruits and vegetables when they're in season? Do they taste better? Do they taste worse? Do they have any experience with that? So having them think about seasonality with the fruits and vegetables, also have them start thinking about some cycles as well. So we have the seasonal cycle, and maybe have them start thinking about the water cycle as well. So how does the water cycle affect the growing of crops? What are the different stages of the watering cycle for the plants that are growing here at Willow-Witt Ranch, and how can that affect the crops that are being grown? And then the last seasonal thing to have them think about, and the last cycle to have them focus on, is the cycle of a plant. So have them focus on a tomato. And so since that's one that we'll be using in salad and on the pizza today, that's a really important one for them to get to know. So have them think about, okay, it starts from a seed, what are the different stages to have it get to a tomato? And once it's a tomato, where do the seeds come from for them to be planted again to grow? So really have the students start thinking about seasonality and cycles as they move on to pick the vegetables, and then as they move on to talk about the different steps of the food chain process and seasonality once we get up to the kitchen. So this is the second part of the Food for Thought lesson that we'll be doing here at Willow-Witt Ranch. And this half of the lesson is focused on students prepping the food that was gathered this morning at the Willow-Witt Ranch, the farm that was down near the base. And then we'll also be talking about where our food is coming from, so the food supply chain. So when students in the morning, they have gathered fruits and vegetables from the farm that we'll be using later to make salad and pizza for lunch. And so all of the food that is being used for the lunch is from the farm. So we'll have goat cheese and then dough that was prepared from the farm staff as well. And so when the students have gathered that, they'll make their way up to the kitchen. And so for lunch, they will be split into two groups. So one group is going to start by doing food prepping, and the other group is going to start by doing a Jeopardy game. So once they each have completed both of those stations, they'll switch, so each group will have a chance to do both. So we'll talk about food prepping in a little bit, but for the Jeopardy game, they're going to be focusing on learning about the food supply chain. So we're going to be focusing first on the national supply chain. So how this game is going to work is there will be a Jeopardy board, and so it'll have different categories on it having to do with seasonal food and where our food is coming from. And so the students will be split into two teams within this group, and they will have to pick a question and see if they can answer it. And if they get a question correct, they'll be given a piece of the national supply chain. And so once they have gotten all of the pieces of their supply chain, they'll be given a few minutes to try to put it in order of how they think it goes. So how do they think that piece of food has gotten from the farm to on their plate? So what steps are being taken? And so once the students have done this, you're going to have them stand in a line, having their pieces laid out. And so you can go through with them and ask them how they came to this conclusion, what was their thought process, and then have them go back and see maybe there's a different way that it could be done too. So have them realize that there's a lot of steps between getting food from the farm to the table basically, and have them think about, are there any steps that they may not have thought about or that they may have missed when they were doing it? Could their pieces be switched? And so once they have gone through that and realized how long that national food supply chain is, have them think about a local food supply chain. So if you're buying food from a farmer's market, how many steps are there from the farm to your table? There's a lot less. And so you can have them then go through and take the pieces of the national food supply chain and just take pieces of that one to see if they can put together a local food supply chain. And then when you're done with those two supply chains, have the students get together in a group and discuss discuss the positives and negatives to both the local and national food supply chain. So have a discussion about the benefits and negatives of both, and have them really get thinking about where their food is coming from and why it's important to make those connections between how your food gets from the farm to your table. So this is the second part of the Food for Thought lesson, and so this is the food prep section of this lesson. And so once the students have gathered the food from the farm, they come back up here and are split into two groups. One does the Jeopardy game and one will be here at food prep to start, and then halfway through they'll switch, so each student will get a chance to do both. So at this food prep station, what's going to be happening is the first group is going to be prepping the pizza. So the dough and the cheese will have been gathered from the farm staff in the morning, and so that'll be prepped for the students before they get here. And so the student's job is to cut up the toppings of the pizza and put the sauce on the pizza and get it ready to be put in the oven to be eaten for lunch. And so for this, they are going to need to learn how to use a knife properly. And so there needs to be a lot of care teaching the students how to use the proper kitchen equipment. And so we teach the students two different methods how to use the knives. We call the first one the bird method and the first one the knuckle method. So the bird method is the first one, and so that's when you have the students hold the knife like this and put their hand on top so their fingers are not in the way, so it kind of looks like a bird flying through the air. And so they can use that to chop the different vegetables and the lettuce from the farm that can be used on the pizza. And another way to do this too is once the students have gotten that way down, you can teach them the knuckle method. So you have your knuckles pressed against the knife and your fingers kind of pulled backwards. And so you can do that to help lead the knife through cutting up the fruits and vegetables as well. And so that knife method you can teach to both groups. And so the first one will be prepping the pizza, and the second group that comes in after that first rotation will be prepping the salad. And so the salad will have been, a mix of different fruits and vegetables gathered from the farm in the morning. And then they'll also be creating the dressing, which will be a honey and olive oil based dressing. And so the students can work on prepping those two things during their time in the kitchen. And then once they're done, the students will come back together and they will be all in one place to eat the meal that they've created from scratch. So the last part of the Food for Thought lesson is going to be discussing food waste. And so how this will work is once the students have finished all of their food for lunch, they will gather it up into one pile, and that pile will be weighed. And so to compare their food waste to other groups that have come up, there will be a graph that's posted on the building behind us on the outside of the kitchen, and that graph will be a comparison of the different food waste from groups that have come up in the past. And so once the group has weighed their food, they will record it using a bar graph on the graph that's hanging outside of the kitchen, and so they will be able to see if they had more or less food waste than other groups. And so you can use that graph to start a discussion about the importance of trying to reduce our food waste. So why is that something important that we should be doing, and have them brainstorm some ideas to think about how to reduce their food waste in everyday life. So at the end of this lesson, you can wrap it up by discussing what was talked about in the beginning, so the different steps of the food supply chain, and also why it's important to eat vegetables that are in season, and talk about the different vegetables and fruits that were found at the farm.